Karen calls 741 on my wife and kids for swimming in our pool, says her daughter deserves it more. Living in the Lakeside Estates neighborhood, have you ever had someone point straight at you and say, your wife and kids don't deserve what rightfully belongs to them? Buckle up, because that's exactly what happened to me. It was a perfect afternoon. Clear skies, laughter echoing from the pool that my family had scraped and saved for months to build then. Karen showed up. She stood right in front of me, looked at my kids and said, my daughter deserves this more than yours. And then she called 911, but what she didn't know is that I have 4 million reasons to fight back and enough resentment to spend. Every last one of them. If you're watching this video from your phone while hiding in a bathroom to escape another numbing HOA meeting, drop a comment and tell me where you're hiding, because I promise this story is one you won't be able to look away from. 6 months ago, when Kesha and I first moved our family into this pristine corner of suburban paradise, we'd finally made it. Marcus Wellington, software engineer with a decent salary, married to the most brilliant civil rights attorney this side of Atlanta, father to 2 incredible kids who deserved every opportunity this world could offer. Our house on Maple Grove Drive wasn't just a home, it was a statement, a declaration that a mixed-race family could thrive anywhere, even in a neighborhood where the average lawn care budget exceeded most people's car payments. The pool had been our splurge, our one concession to the American dream. Watching 8-year-old Zara teach 6-year-old Malik how to hold his breath underwater while Kesha graded Lego briefs from her floating chair, I felt like we'd cracked some impossible code. That Saturday afternoon started like any other weekend in our new routine. I was manning the grill, flipping burgers, with the confidence of a man who'd figured out the perfect char-to-juice ratio, when I heard Zara's delighted squeal from the pool. Daddy, watch this. She cannonballed into the deep end with thieferless abandon that only children possess, sending a splash that soaked Malik's carefully constructed pool noodle fort. Kesha laughed from her spot at the shallow end, her natural hair glistening with pool water, looking gradient in the late afternoon sun. These were the moments that made every struggle worth it. Every sack. The sound of my family's happiness echoing off the water was better than any symphony ever composed. Then I saw her approaching from across the pristine lawn, and something in my gut immediately went cold. Vivian Blackwood moved with the purposeful stride of someone who'd appointed herself judge, jury, and executioner off neighborhood standards. She was impeccably dressed even for a casual Saturday, her blonde bob so perfectly stilled it looked like she'd stepped out of a real estate brochure, but her eyes, red-rimmed and slightly wild, told a different story. Behind her trailed a girl who looked to be about 9. Madison Woe's expression seemed caught between confusion and fear as Vivian drew closer. I noticed the tight set of her jaw, the way her manicured fingers clenched and unclenched at her sides. This wasn't a social visit. Excuse me, Vivian, called out her voice, carrying that particular brand of authority that comes from years of running PTA meetings and homeowners association committees. Your family is using the pool incorrectly. I set down my spatula and walked toward the fence that separated our backyard from the common area, trying to keep my expression neutral. Kesha had stopped reading and was now watching intently, her ear instincts clearly picking up on the tension in the air. Zara and Malik continued playing blissfully, unaware that their perfect afternoon was about to take a dramatic turn. I'm sorry. What do you mean incorrectly? I asked, genuinely confused. This is our pool on our property. Vivan's laugh was sharp and bitter. Like glass breaking your pool, your family doesn't deserve what you have here. My daughter has been living in this neighborhood far longer than those children have even been alive. The word shit me like a physical blow, not because of their audacity, but because of the clear racial undertone that dripped from every syllable. Vivan's gaze moved deliberately from my face to Zara and Malik, her meaning unmistakably clear. Some people, she continued, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that somehow felt more threatening than shouting, need to understand their place in the natural order of things. Madison shifted uncomfortably behind her, and I caught a glimpse of something that looked like shame in the girl's eyes. This child knew what her guardian was doing was wrong, even if she didn't have the power to stop it. Kesha was now standing in the pool, water streaming from her body as she prepared to join what was clearly about to become a confrontation. My hands started to shake slightly, not from fear but from the effort it took to maintain my composure in the face of such blatant prejudice. Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding, I said, forcing my voice to remain level and reasonable. This pool is on our private property. We purchased this house 6 months ago, and all the paperwork is completely legitimate. If you have concerns about neighborhood regulations, I'd be happy to show you our deed and permits. But Vivian was non-interested in reasonable discourse. Her eyes had taken on a gleam that I would later recognize as the look of some who had been planning this confrontation for far longer than a random Saturday afternoon encounter. She pulled out her phone with theatrical precision, holding it up like a weapon. There's been a theft, she announced loudly enough for Enyon, within a 3-block radius, to hear. A family is trespassing on property that doesn't belong to them and refusing to vacate when asked by the rightful owners. Before I could process what was happening, Vivan had dialed 911 yes and need police assistance immediately, she said into the phone, her voice suddenly taking on the trembling quality of a victim in distress. There's a family on my property who are trespassing and becoming aggressive. when asked to have a child with me, and I'm afraid for our safety. The lie was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I wondered if I was losing my mind. Had we somehow bought the wrong house? Were we actually in the wrong? But then I looked at my family, at Kesh's expression of pure fury, and my children's growing confusion, and I knew with absolute accordance that this woman was orchestrating something far more sinister than a simple property dispute. Vivian continued her performance for the 911 dispatcher, complete with strategically placed pauses and modulated fear in her voice. I realized this wasn't some random Karen having a bad day. The way she positioned Hurst, the practiced cadence of her complaint, the way Madison seemed to know exactly where to stand for maximum visual impact, this was choreographed. Vivian Blackwood hadn't stumbled onto our property by accident. She had come here with a plan, and whatever that plan was, it was just getting started. The question that sent ice through my veins wasn't what she wanted, but how long she'd been watching my family, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Davis pulled into our driveway with the measured calm of someone who'd responded to thousands of domestic disputes. He was a tall, weathered man in his 50s, with the kind of steady presence that suggested he'd seen every variation of human drama the suburbs could produce. What struck me immediately was how his eyes took in Thessini, not with the rushed judgment I'd expected, but with the careful assessment of someone gathering facts. He nodded politely to Vivian, then to me, his expression professionally neutral. "Afternoon, folks. I understand there's some confusion about property lines here." His tone was respectful, but probing, and I caught something in his gaze when he looked at my family that made me wonder if this wasn't as straightforward as it appeared. "Officer, thank goodness you're here." Vivian immediately launched into her performance, her voice trembling with what seemed like genuine distress. "This family has been using our community pool without permission, and when I asked them politely to respect our neighborhoods, they became hostile and refused to leave." She gestured dramatically toward Zara and Malik, who were now standing close to Kesha at the pool's edge, sensing the adult tension, even if they couldn't understand its source. Sheriff Davis listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding, but I noticed high size kept returning to our house, specifically to the visible property markers and the pool that was obviously within our fence line. When Vivian finished her carefully rehearsed complaint, he turned to me with what he could have sworn was a barely perceptible wink. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some documentation of ownership." "Sheriff," Davis said, his voice carrying just enough official authority to satisfy Vivian while somehow conveying tone that this was theater standard procedure in property disputes. The request should have annoyed me. After all, we're clearly on our land, but something in his demeanor suggested he was testing more than just my paperworkers. I jogged inside to grab our deed and permits. I heard Kesha's voice rise slightly, her lawyer instincts trigger Redby, what felt like racial profiling disguised as procedure. "Interesting that you need documentation from us, when we're clearly on our property," she called out, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. But when I returned with our documents, Sheriff Davis examined them with the thoroughness of someone who already knew what he would find. "Just as I thought, we'd settled the matter." Vivian reached into her oversized designer purse and pulled out what looked like a legal bombshell. "Officer, I have documentation that supersedes anything they might have shown you." She produced a folder containing what appeared to be an old property contract, yellowed with age and covered in official-looking stamps and signatures. My heart sank as I saw Sheriff Davis's expression change, his professional mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine concern. "This is the original sales agreement for this property from 15 years ago," Vivian announced. With the confidence of someone playing a winning hand, it clearly states that the Blackwood family retains perpetual rights to the recreational facilities on the slot, including the swimming pool area. These people may own the house, but they do not have exclusive rights to the pool. The document looked legitimino to fool a casual observer, complete with what appeared to be notarized signatures and county seals. Vivian spread it out on our patio table, like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury, her finger tracing the relevant clauses with practiced precision. "You see here and here," she pointed to specific paragraphs that seemed to support her claim. "The previous owners agreed that any future sales would honor the Blackwood family's historical connection to this property. My daughter Madison has been swimming in this pool since she was a toddler. We have photographic evidence, witness testimonies, and now legal documentation proving our rights." Sheriff Davis studied the contract with the intensity of someone who understood the implications, occasionally glancing up ATM with an expression that was becoming increasingly difficult to read. Madison, who had been silent throughout the satire confrontation, finally spoke up with a devastating innocence that only children possess. "Mommy Vivian, why are we trying to take their pool away? They seem nice, and their little girl offered to share her pool toys with me." The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode, and I watched Vivian's carefully constructed facade crack just slightly with her. "This isn't about taking anything away," she said, her voice taking on the false sweetness adults use when leading two children. "This is about making sure everyone gets what they deserve, and some people need to learn that they can't just take whatever they want. The way she emphasized some people while looking directly at my family left no doubt about her meaning, but it was Kesha who finally broke the tension with the kind of legal precision that reminded me I'd fallen in love with her brilliant mind. Ma'am, before we go any further with this fascinating document you've produced, I think you should know that I'm an attorney specializing in property law and civil rights. Her voice carried the controlled fury of someone who'd spent years fighting institutional racism and recognized it in whatever form it took. And unless I'm very much mistaken, that contract you're waving around has some very interesting characteristics that I'd love to examine more closely, starting with the fact that the notary seal appears to be from a stamp that wasn't used by this county until 3 years ago. The color drained from Vivon's face so quickly that for a moment I thought she might faint, but she recovered with the desperate creativity of someone whose entire plan was unraveling in real time. Sheriff Davis, who had been listening to this exchange with growing interest, looked up from the Contra with an expression that had shifted from official neutrality to something much more serious. He folded the document carefully and handed it back to Vivon, then turned to me with eyes that seemed to be trying to communicate something important. Mr. Wellington, I think we need to have a private conversation, he said quietly, his voice carrying an urgency that made my stomach drop. There are some things about this situation that you need to understand, and they're bigger than a simple property dispute. As he spoke, I noticed him glance meaningfully toward his patrol car, then back at Vivon, who was now clutching Madison's hand with white-knuckled intensity. Whatever wash up hunting here, Sheriff Davis knew more than he was letting on, and suddenly I realized that our perfect Saturday afternoon had just become something much more dangerous than a neighborhood disagreement. That evening at 10 o'clock sharp, I found myself standing in my garage, feeling like a character in some bizarre suburban thriller. Sheriff Davis had arrived exactly on time, his patrol car parked discreetly around the corner to avoid drawing attention from nosy neighbors. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his weathered face as he closed the garage door behind him, creating an atmosphere that felt more like a clandestine meeting than a neighborhood consultation. Mr. Wellington, what I'm about to tell you needs to stay between us for now, he began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been carrying a heavy secret. Vivon Blackwood isn't just some unhinged neighbor having a bad day. I've been tracking her activities for the past 8 months as part of a broader investigation into what we're calling predatory gentrification fraud. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, confirming my worst suspicions, while simultaneously opening up possibilities. I'd never imagined she's part of something bigger, I asked, my voice bare a whisper. Sheriff Davis nodded, grimly pulling out a manila folder thick with photographs and documents. Muckbager, we've identified at least 12 women operating in affluent neighborhoods across 3 counties, eliciting similar tactics to target successful minority families who've recently moved into predominantly white communities. He spread out surveillance photos showing Vivian meeting with other well-dressed suburban women in coffee shops and parking lots, their faces animated with the kind of conspiratorial intensity that suggested these weren't casual social gatherings. They call themselves the Neighborhood Protection Network, and their methods are sophisticated. They research property records, study social media profiles, and coordinate their attacks to maximize psychological pressure while staying just within legal boundaries. The scope of it was staggering. As Sheriff Davies walked me through their evidence, I realized that our family hadn't been randomly targeted by a racist neighbor, been carefully selected by what was essentially a domestic terrorism cell operating under the cover of suburban respectability. They typically choose families like yours, he explained, pointing to a profile sheet that made my blood run cold. Successful, well-educated, with children, who represent everything these women fear about changing demographics in their precious neighborhoods. The goal isn't just to drive you out, it's to create a public spectacle that will discourage other minority families from moving in. The psychological warfare aspect was particularly insidious, designed to make victims doubt their perceptions while appearing to outside observers like a legitimate community concerns. But the revelation that hit me hardest was about Madison, the little girl, isn't Vivon's daughter, Sheriff Davis said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of this particular cruelty. She's Vivon's niece, taken in after her mother died in a car accident 2 years ago. The child has no idea she's being used as a prop in these elaborate schemes. The thought of that innocent 9-year-old bung manipulated into participating in racial harassment made my hands clench into fists. Madison genuinely believes Viv is trying to protect her rights, and she's been coached to cry on cue and recite specific phrases about fairness and belonging. It's psychological abuse disguised as advocacy. This explained the condition and guilt I'd seen in Madison's eyes, the way she seemed uncomfortable with Vivon's more aggressive statements later that night. As tried to process everything Sheriff Davis had told me, Kesha and I found ourselves in our first real fight since moving to Lakeside Estates. Maybe we made a mistake, I said, staring out our bedroom window at the pool that had come the center of this nightmare. Maybe we should have stayed in our old neighborhood where people accepted us for who we are. Kesha's response was swift and fierce, her voice cracking with emotion I rarely heard from my usually composed wife. Marcus Wellington, don't you dare let that woman make you question our right to be here. Our children deserve to swim in their pool without having to justify their existence to racist vigilantes. But Evanes, she spoke with conviction. I could see the doubt creeping in around the edges the way this attack had shaken her faith in the world. We'd thought we could build for our family the next morning brought another layer of complexity when Mershan, our quiet neighbor from across the street, appeared at our front door, carrying what looked like an antique recording device. I'd barely spoken to the elderly woman since we'd moved in, aside from polite waves and occasional comments about the weather, but her expression suggested she had information that could change everything. I've been watching that Blackwood woman for months, she said in accented English that carried surprising steel. My husband Wasan, electronics engineer in Taiwan, taught me many things about surveillance before he died. This machine looks old, but it works very well for recording conversations through Windows. She handed me a small device that looked like it belonged in a 1980s spy movie. Its analog dials and mechanical components suggest it operated completely outside the digital realm that modern surveillance detection might monitor. Mershan, are you saying you've been recording Vivon's conversations? I asked, hardly daring to hope the small woman, with the satisfaction of someone who'd been waiting for the right moment to reveal her secret weapon for 6 months. I watched her practice speeches in front of a mirror, coach that poor little girl to cry on command and make phone calls to coordinate with other women. She thinks nobody pays attention to the old Chinese lady, but I see everything as she spoke. Madison's bicycle appeared in our driveway, the girl pedaling Frontacalia's. If escaping from something, she dropped the bike and ran toward our front door, tears streaming down her face, clutching what appeared to be a small notebook to her chest. Mr. Marcus, she called out, her voice breaking with sobs. I found where Mommy Vivian keeps all her secret papers, and I think she's been lying about everything. The convergence of these revelations felt like the universe finally tipping the scales toward justice, but I knew we were still only seeing the surface of whatever web Vivian had constructed around our family. As Madison stood on our doorstep, visibly trembling, with the effort of choosing truth over the only stability she'd known since her mother's death, I realized that our fight had evolved beyond a simple property dispute into something that would test the very foundations of our community's values. Madison's notebook turned out to be a goldmine of evidence that would have made any prosecutor weep with joy. The 9-year-old had been meticulously documenting Vivon's phone calls and meetings for weeks, not out of suspicion but from the innocent curiosity of a child trying to understand the adult world around her. Her handwriting was careful and precise as she'd recorded fragments of conversation. V talked to someone about target acquisition and said our neighbors have elevated vulnerability metrics. Read one entry dated 3 weeks earlier. An author page contained a crude map of our neighborhood with X's marking houses where minority families lived, accompanied by notes about income levels, children's ages, and what Madison had labeled deployment schedules. The clinical precision of it all made my skin crawl, realizing that our family's daily routines had been studied and cataloged like specimens. In some twisted social experiment, Jake Morrison arrived within an hour of my frantic phone calls, laptop bag slung over his shoulder, and the grim expression of someone who'd seen enough property fraud to recognize it real thing as my attorney. And longtime friend Jake had handled our house purchase and knew every detail of for legitimate paperwork, which made him the perfect person to analyze Vivon's mysteriously aged contract. Marcus' thesis, sophisticated work, he said, adjusting his glasses as he examined the document under a magnifying lamp he brought from his office. The paper has been artificially aged using tea staining and controlled exposure to UV light, but whoever did this made some critical errors. Look at this notary seal. He pointed to what appeared to be an official stamp in the corner of the page. This particular design wasn't implemented by the county clerk's office until 2021. But the contract is supposedly from 2008. While Jake worked legal magic, Mrs. Chun had set up her vintage recording equipment in our living room. The analog dials and mechanical components looking like props from a Cold War thriller. Modern digital surveillance can be detected in blockage, explained, as she connected various cables and adjustments, but old analog equipment operates on different frequencies, harder to jam or trace. My husband taught me many tricks for recording through glass and walls. The machine hummed to life with the satisfying mechanical sounds of bygone technology, and Mrs. Chen's weathered fingers moved across the controls with practiced expertise. I have 6 months of recording, she said, producing a shoe box filled with magnetic tapes, labeled in neat Chinese characters. That woman talks too much when she thinks nobody is listening. The first tape Mrs. Chen played made my blood run cold. Vivon's voice, clear and unmistakable, was discussing strategy with someone she called regional coordinator Sarah. The Wellington family fits our profile perfectly, Vivian said with the detached professionalism of a military briefing. Husband's a software engineer pulling 6 figures. Wife's a civil rights attorney, which adds delicious irony to the psychological pests. And they have 2 children, who photograph well for social media sympathy campaigns. Pool gives us perfect visual optics for the dispossession narrative. The conversation continued with discussion soft deep fake technology, social media, bot farms, and coordinated hair. That revealed a level of organization that went far beyond neighborhood racism into some thing approaching domestic terrorism, but it was the second tape that truly broke my heart. Madison's voice, small and confused, asking Vivan questions that no child should have to ask. Mommy V, why do we have to pretend to cry when the camera's sorry watching the nice man and lady across the street seem kind to their children? Vivan's response was chilling, and it's casual manipulation, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have top lay pretend to protect what's important. Those people took something that doesn't belong to them, and we need to help them understand that their children don't deserve nice things more than you do. Can you practice your sad face for me? The sound of Madison's forced sobbing, coached and directed like a twisted acting lesson, made Kesha grab my hand so tightly her nails drew blood. Jake's analysis of the deepfake video proved equally damning. This is impressive work from a technical standpoint, he said, pointing to subtle inconsistencies in the lighting and shadow patterns on his laptop screen. They used sophisticated AI to map your facial features onto a completely different person, but they made the classic mistake of not accounting for regional accent patterns. Listen to this. He played a segment where a fake Marcus supposedly threatened a previous homeowner, and I could hear the slight southern drawl that wasn't my natural speaking voice. More importantly, I've traced the creation metadata to a company called Digital Narrative Solutions, which happens to be owned by a firm that also employs Vivan's ex-husband, the same ex-husband who filleted a restraining order against her 2 years ago for identity theft and financial fraud. The scope of Vivan's deception was staggering, but what terrified me most was how close she'd come to succeeding without mercy and surveillance. Madison's documentation and Jake's technical expertise, our family could have been destroyed by an elaborate fraud that most people would never have questioned. She's done this before, hasn't she? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mrs. Chen nodded, grimly producing another set of tapes, labeled with different addresses for other families. In 18 months, she confirmed, all successful, all moved away within 6 weeks of initial contact. Police reports filed but never seriously investigated because evidence always disappeared, and witnesses recanted their statements as we sat in our living room surrounded by evidence of systematic persecution. Kesha suddenly stood up with the fierce determination I'd fallen in love with during our law school days. That's it, she announced, her voice carrying the controlled fury of someone who'd reached their breaking point. I'm not running, I'm not hiding, and I'm sure as hell not letting that woman destroy another family. We're going to expose this entire network, and we're going to do it in a way that ensures they never target another family again. Her words sent a chill down my spine, not from fear but from the recognition that my brilliant wife had just declared war on force Mac, larger and more dangerous than a single racist neighbor. But as I looked around at the evidence we'd gathered, at Madison's innocent trust in our protection, and at Mrs. Chen's quiet determination to see justice done, I realized that sometimes the most important battles are the ones you never wanted to fight. Madison led us to Vivan's basement, like a tiny tour guide revealing the secrets of a criminal empire, her small hand gripping mine with desperate trust of a child who'd finally found adults willing to listen. The basement itself looked innocuous at first glance, decorated with the kind of suburban storage aesthetic that screamed normal family life. But Madison knew exactly where to look. She keeps the real papers behind the water heater, Madison whispered, her voice barely audible as she pointed to a section of drywall that looked slightly different from the rest. I found it when I was playing hide-and-seek by myself, because I get lonely when Mommy V is on her important phone calls. Sheriff Davis produced a small crowbar from his toolkit, and within minutes, we'd revealed a hidden compartment that contained enough evidence to fuel nightmares for years to come. The files were meticulously organized with the efficiency of a corporate operation, each family's persecution documented in color-coded folders that made my stomach turn. The Johnsons on Elm Street, the Patels on Birch Avenue, the Hernandez family on Oak Drive, and the Washingtons in Pine Circle, all reduced to data points in systematic campaign of racial cleansing. Each folder contains Spicolacock profiles, financial records illegally obtained through identity theft, photographs taken with telephoto lenses, and detailed timelines mapping when children walked to school, buses, or when parents left for work. Jesus Christ, Sheriff Davis muttered, photographing page after page of evidence. This is stalking and harassment on an industrial scale. But what made it even more sinister was the clinical language used throughout, referring to families as displacement targets and children as emotional leverage assets. Madison's voice broke the horrified silence as she pulled out a journal filled with her handwriting. Mommy V made me practice being sad for 2 months. She said, her words barely above a whisper. She said if I could cry good on camera, she would take me to see my real grandma in Florida like she promised. But every time I did what she wanted, she said I needed to practice more. The journal contained instructions that Vivan had given her: when to cry, what phrases to repeat, how to look scared when adults were watching. She told me that the nice family across the street had stolen my swimming pool and that I needed to help get it back, but I never remembered having a pool before. The manipulation was so thorough and cruel that I found myself wanting to protect this child from her memories. But the most damning evidence came in the form of financial cords that revealed the true scope of the operation. Look at this, Jake said, spreading out bank statements and wire transfer receipts across Vivian's dining table. She's been receiving payments of $15,000 for each successful neighborhood restoration, as they call it. And the money is coming from something called the Heritage Preservation Foundation, which appears to be a front organization for wealthy donors who want to maintain racial segregation without getting their own hands dirty. The paper trail showed connections to real estate developers, political action committees, and even some names I recognized from local government positions. This wasn't just suburban racism, it was a coordinated effort to systematically exclude minority families from affluent communities. Mrs. Chen's surveillance rectings provided the smoking gun that tied everything together. Listen to this conversation from last Tuesday. She said, adjusting the analog dials on her ancient equipment. Vivian's voice filled the room cold and calculating as she discussed our family with someone identified in Madison's notes as coordinator. Williams. The Wellington extraction is proceeding ahead of schedule. The deepfake video has generated sufficient social media engagement, and local law enforcement is applying appropriate pressure regarding tax compliance. If Phase 3 proceeds as planned, we should have full property vacation within 2 weeks. The casual way she discussed destroying our lives using terminology that sounded like military planning made Kesha grab the edge of the table so hard her knuckles went white. Recordings also revealed how Madison had been systematically isolated and manipulated. Child is becoming problematic, Vivian said in another conversation. She started asking questions about why we moved her away from her grandmother, and why she's not allowed to play with neighborhood children unsupervised. We may need to accelerate the timeline before she compromises operational security. Hearing 9-year-old described as a security threat by her guardian was devastating, but it also explained why Madison had seemed so desperate to connect with our family despite Vivon's instructions. I just wanted to play with her kids, Madison said quietly, tears streaming down her face. But Mommy V said other families were dangerous, and that I could only be safe if I helped her protect our neighborhood. As we continued documenting evidence, Sheriff Davis received a call that changed everything. That was FBI agent Rodriguez. He said after hanging up, apparently our investigation triggered some federal databases, and they've been tracking this Heritage Preservation Foundation for months. They're requesting immediate assistance with across 3 states. The realization that our neighborhood dispute had uncovered a multi-state conspiracy felt surreal, like we'd accidentally stumbled into the plot of a political thriller. But here's the thing, Sheriff Davis spoke with the first real smile I'd seen from him all week. Agent Rodriguez wants to coordinate a public exposure event, live-streamed arrests, to prevent evidence tampering and protect witnesses. But just as we thought we had the upper hand, Vivian's voice pierced the air from upstairs, sharp, panicked, furious. Madison, Madison, where are you? You get up here right now. Her heavy footsteps pounded above us, thanks to Madison's detailed notes. We knew Vivian had returned early from what was supposed to be a coordination meeting with other network members. She's going to be mad, Madison whispered, instinctively inching closer to Kesha. When she gets like this, she calls scary people who make bad things happen to families who don't listen. But this time, the fear wasn't ours. Vivian was no longer the hunter. The predator had just learned her prey had claws. The decision to go public felt like jumping off a cliff with no idea if there was water below, but sometimes, you have to leap. Agent Rodriguez arrived an hour after Davis called, sharp-eyed mid-40s, and exuding the calm authority of someone who regularly dismantles criminal enterprises. Mr. Wellington, we've been tracking the Heritage Preservation Foundation across multiple states for 8 months, she said, as we set up cameras in our living room. Your story gives us the perfect opportunity to take them down while they think they're still in control. But once we go live, there's no turning back. Vivian and her people will do everything they can to discredit you. The weight of her words settled on my shoulders like a brick. Our family's humiliation might either destroy us or finally set us free. Within 20 minutes of going live, our viewer count exploded. The comments section moved too fast to follow, but the sentiment was clear. People were hungry for truth and justice. At Poolside Truth Hunter, the anonymous account that had tracked our story from the beginning, moderated the chat and provided real-time fact-checking. Y'all, I've been investigating this network for months. They wrote in all caps. What the Wellingtons are showing you is just the beginning. This group has forced out over 40 families in 7 states. Vivian showed up like a storm, her polished mask shattered. She pounded the door, both fists flying. Open this door now. You've kidnapped my daughter. I'm calling the police. But she didn't realize Sheriff Davis and Agent Rodriguez were already inside, and Madison was safe, sitting between Kesha and Mrs. Chen on our couch. Over 150,000 people watched live as Vivian's true self unraveled on camera. The suburban facade crumbled, revealing the predator beneath. Ma'am, you need to step back from the door, Agent Rodriguez said calmly through the intercom. This is an active federal investigation. You are being recorded, Vivian panicked. She cycled through personas like a drowning woman grasping at air. First, the wounded mother. They brainwashed Madison. She's just a child. Then, righteous rage. I was protecting this neighborhood from people who don't belong. Finally, she dropped the mask altogether. Some families deserve better lives. We're just maintaining the natural order. But it was Madison's quiet voice that broke hearts and sealed Vivian's fate. Mommy Vivian, she said, tears brimming in her eyes. You told me we were helping people, but you hurt families and made kids cry. You said their kids didn't deserve nice things, but they've been nothing but kind to me. Her words echoed across the live stream, now nearing 200,000 viewers. Many were openly weeping in the comments. I want to go to my real grandma now. I don't want to pretend anymore. When Madison walked away from Vivian and into our arms, it was a moment seen around the world. A 9-year-old rejecting hate on camera, a symbol of innocence reclaiming truth. Then, right as Agent Rodriguez prepared to make arrests, our internet cut out. A sudden, deliberate blackout. It was sabotage, clear and coordinated. But Mrs. Chumbless, her analog heart, was ready. Digital networks can be compromised, she said calmly, but phone lines, not so easy. Within minutes, she'd patched her vintage recording setup into a landline conference call. Audio broadcast resumed, and Agent Rodriguez's tech team worked to restore video. 20 minutes later, our live stream was back. Viewer count over 300,000. Agent Rodriguez stepped into frame. Her calm voice carried the weight of truth. What you've witnessed is a coordinated conspiracy involving identity theft, harassment, and psychological manipulation, she said. Over the past 8 months, we've documented 43 confirmed incidents in 7 states, totaling over $12 million in forced property transfers. The climax came when Sheriff Davis opened Mrs. Chen's shoebox of tapes and pressed play. Vivian's recorded voice cold, clinical. Target families are selected based on vulnerability. Recent relocations, children, social media activity, average timeline, 6 weeks to property vacation. Psychological pressure, only minimal legal risk. Her voice was ice. Her intent, unmistakable. But it was Madison's journal and her innocent questions. Why are we mean to nice people? That delivered a gut punch of truth the world couldn't ignore. As agents led Vivian away, her final words to the camera were chilling. You think you've won? There are hundreds more like me. We will never stop protecting what's rightfully ours. But she was wrong. So very wrong. 1 year later, the pool that started this nightmare became something extraordinary. Every Saturday, I watched from our kitchen window as 30 kids from across 3 counties laughed and splashed in water that now meant freedom. Healing home. Madison, now 11, thriving with her grandmother just 2 miles away, had become my unofficial assistant swim instructor, Mr. Marcus. Little Sophia's ready for the diving board, she'd call out, her voice filled with joy. Her transformation from manipulated child to beacon of confidence felt like a miracle. The legal aftermath came swiftly. Vivian was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for conspiracy, identity theft, and hate crimes. The Heritage Preservation Foundation, dismantled, 12 board members charged across 7 states. Agent Rodriguez kept us updated. The scope was staggering. Over 200 families targeted, 43 displaced, nearly $50 million in manipulated property value. The Wellington case cracked it all open, she told us. Because you went public, others found the courage to speak. But the real victory wasn't in courtrooms. It was in what followed. The Lakeside Estates HOA was restructured. New bylaws banned discrimination. Oversight committees formed representing every part of our community. Mrs. Chen became a local hero. Her analog surveillance work made national news. She now leads the neighborhood watch. Technology is just a tool, she said. Human kindness. That's the real security system. 6 months after Vivian's sentencing, the city council called. Mr. Wellington, Councilwoman Martinez said, we'd like you to serve as our community relations director. Your experience would help ensure no family ever goes through what yours did. It felt like fate, turning pain into purpose, trauma into leadership. Kesha, too, found her calling, partnering with the Southern Poverty Law Center to launch the Family Protection Legal Fund. Their mission: offer free legal aid to families facing disguised housing discrimination. Modern racism wears a clipboard, Kesha said at her first public speech. It hides behind property values and community standards, but when we stand together, we can expose it. The fund helped 12 families in its first year, stopped 3 more heritage copycats. End at Poolside Truth Hunter. They revealed themselves at our first annual community pool day. Maria Santos, investigative journalist, 2 years undercover, her Pulitzer-winning expose and documentary, now screened in schools across the country. But the phone call that meant the most came in March, 13 months after Vivian's arrest. Mr. Marcus, this is Isabella Washington. You might not remember us, but I did. From the files. From the heartbreak, their family had returned to Lakeside. Bought a bigger house, just 3 streets away. What your family did gave us courage. Isabella said, choking up, our kids sleep through the night now. My husband no longer checks the locks twice. We're finally home again. Now, As I sit by the pool on a perfect Saturday, watching Madison teach swimming to a group of children who speak Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, and 3 African dialects, I'm overwhelmed. Zara and Malik, 9 and 7, are growing up knowing that safety isn't silence. It's standing up for what's right. Vivian tried to take our pool, but she couldn't take what it came to represent, a place where belonging is built, not assumed, where difference is celebrated, not feared, because sometimes the battles you never wanted lead to the world you've always hoped for, and in the end, the most powerful weapon against hate isn't rage, it's courage.